Super excited about this month's book club because we are talking about Allie Carter's newest book, which is Dear Allie, How Do I Write a Book? Now, if you've never read Allie Carter, she does mostly write young adult, and she has a middle grade novel coming out next month that I'm super excited about. But she's amazing and super friendly, crazy nice, and this is a really great book, so I highly recommend it. And as I always say, these book notes are simply a recap so that you can join Jessie and I this Friday for book club, where we will be talking about the Dear Allie book, romance writing in general, and of course our favorite, ice cream. So if you don't have time to if you don't have time to read the entire book, this is a quick recap so we can chat about Cinderella and Her 7 Guards series, and on this channel we talk all about romance writing, specifically for newbie and aspiring romance authors. So if this sounds like you or something you might be interested in, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. I post new videos every Monday. Now today's video does come with a huge disclaimer. I will repeat it again when we're in the slides, but I know that Allie Carter writes young adult, and because she has a middle grade book coming out next year, you might have stumbled upon this video because you yourself are a young adult, and that is part of the intention of this book. However, this particular channel and my branding, Lisa London Books, is 100% not for children. We talk about romance writing, and because of that, we do talk about sex, which I feel is 100% inappropriate to talk about with children. So if you're not 18 or over, stop watching. This video isn't really for you. It is a recap of this book, but I have not at all written or recapped anything that was meant for children. So if she did give advice for kids, and you should definitely read this book, it's really great, but I did not put any of that in here because that's really not who the audience is for this channel or this video. And if you are an adult, you should feel comfortable knowing that I've skipped all of the kiddie parts and there's no children parts, kid tween advice inside of these book notes, which is still great advice inside of the book. We're only focused on how to write a young adult novel because there is a lot of great information in this book. So let's just jump into the slides. Let's jump into the slides. Now, there's a lot of information in this book, like tons of value-added information. So for sure, 100%. The notes are just an overview of some of the highlights, and I would 100% recommend reading the book. I think it's definitely worth your time. I loved reading it and got a lot of value from it. Now, you'll notice that I have these 18+ signs over here because this is really for adults, and we'll talk about that later, but this channel is for adults. We talk about romance writing, and this book summary is for adults, even though this book was partially aimed towards young adults. Hopefully this also inspires you to join Jessie and I for our ice cream social this Friday. And again, only if you're 18 or older. We have a discussion every Friday where we do a live stream and we talk about ice cream, we talk about romance writing, author life, and we have decided to do a book club component. So we are talking about Dear Allie for this Friday, June 21st at 8 p.m. So you can either watch that on my channel, just show up, or you can check the link below for the Crowdcast link because we multicast to those two platforms. And honestly, it goes to Crowdcast first, and then there's a slight like 5 or 7 second delay to when it multicasts over to YouTube. But you can ask us questions and interact with us on both platforms. It's just that Crowdcast will give you a Google Calendar invite. Now, if you want today's slides, I definitely want to share them with you. Check the link in the description and you can have them. And I would highly advise that because there's actually a lot more information on the slides than I'm probably going to go through, because this is the 5th time I'm recording this, and each time it was like an hour and a half, which is way too long for a book summary. So you definitely want to get the slides. Now, what are we going to go over? I have a huge disclaimer because this book was written for young adults and tweens, but there's a lot of value for adults or people who just want to write YA. So anything related to children is completely out of scope. Like, I just didn't even include it in the notes at all. We'll talk about who Allie Carter is because she's pretty amazing, and what this book is that we're even reading in the first place, and then I'll do a chapter breakdown for you. Now, I know there are only 13 chapters, but they're densely packed with a lot of good information. So just trying to give the overviews. Now you'll notice there's a huge under 18 sign like sprinkled throughout here, and that's because this book, Allie Carter writes for young adults. And so I'm sure if you found this video through just searching her name because you love Allie Carter, which I don't blame you, I do too. She does get a lot of questions from young adults and children that want to write books. And because of that, she has consolidated information that she was hoping to be helpful to them as well as people who just want to write young adult regardless of what age they are. So this channel, I myself, I'm a romance author. And because I'm a romance author on this channel, we talk about sex. And I know that different people feel differently, but I personally feel that discussing, romance writing and sex with children is highly inappropriate. And I'm defining as children as anyone who's under the age of 18. So for that reason, I have purposely excluded anything related to kiddie advice from the notes from today. So for example, she had a question there, do I need good grades in English? This answer only applies to kids, and so I didn't even talk about it in this book summary. So, my brand, everything that I do is about romance writing, and it's all angled towards adults. So, definitely I wish, anybody who's 12, 13 who wants to write, I wish them well, but this is just not the channel for you. All right, so let's talk about who Allie Carter is, assuming you're still here because you're 18 or over. Allie's a New York Times bestselling author. She writes young adults. She started out writing adult romance, and now she's actually switching over to middle grade. So she has a book coming out next year, but I just love her writing. So I'm not really a big middle grade reader, but I don't dislike it. So I am 100% excited about that book, and I'm going to read it. She lives in her hometown of Oklahoma, and she's actually always wanted to be a writer since she herself was in middle grade. Now, I also say she's super friendly and nice in person. I'm sure she has no idea who I am, but I had the opportunity to meet her in person at a writing conference, and she was on a panel, and I went to her afterwards. I think she was standing there with her agent, Kristen Nelson, and asking her questions. And she was super friendly and very encouraging and supportive. And if you ever have the opportunity to meet her at a conference, you should definitely approach her. She's very nice. So what is Dear Allie? So just backtracking a little, I don't know if you guys know this, there's two covers for the book, and the one on the left is the hardcover ebook cover, and the one on the right is the paperback cover. Now, I actually have both books, and I did a little informal survey on Instagram stories asking people which one they liked better, and everybody liked the one on the right better. I think it just looks cuter and happier. The one on the left, I think because there's black in the background, it looks kind of dark and ominous, whereas the one on the right looks a little happier. So I don't know if you noticed, but if you look really closely, the one on the left has the names of all the authors that helped contribute to the book, because she does have a lot of contributions sprinkled in throughout the book, which was actually kind of nice, including Marissa Meyer, which I was super psyched about because I am a huge fan of the Cinder series. So anyways, this book was written this year, so it's very recent in 2019, and it's her personal advice for how to write young adult. And again, as I mentioned, she does have advice in here. Specifically, she said she wanted to write a book that was also helpful for people who are tweens or teens, but any kiddie advice like that was purposely excluded from this particular book summary that you're watching because it's only for 18 and above. All right, so let's jump into the chapter breakdowns. Now, at the top, here's how I split it up. So at the top, if there was a contributor, because she actually had a lot of different contributors adding information into the chapter. So within one chapter, you could get advice also from, say, 10 or 12 other authors. But I just picked maybe one that I found interesting and highlighted. And again, not to say the others weren't valuable. There's just only so much space, and it's supposed to be a quick summary. So the next section is just like you saw before with Jennifer Probst, which was, what is this chapter about? So I just highlighted a couple things, and then the main takeaway for the chapter. And this was a little different because these chapters are very densely packed with a lot of craft information. And so when I say the main takeaway, they're probably more honestly my personal main takeaways because there was so much information within each chapter. And I'm not complaining, I think it's great. But at first I was like, there's only 13 chapters in this book. And that's because she put a lot of value into each chapter. So this one is, I just thought this was interesting because I, in my 20s, just partied. Like literally, if there was a party or someone was clubbing or like anywhere, like I was there. And that was my whole purpose for, just being in my 20s. And, honestly, I think I got a lot of good material for books for later. But I thought this was interesting and very responsible. Cody wrote while in college and totally missed out on a lot of social events in order to write. And I do think that, and she talks about this later, to be a professional author, you need to be ready to be one and be able to meet deadlines and sacrifice social activities and tons of other things in order to make deadlines. So I just noted that here because I think that's something you should also think about. Now, Allie shared with us that it takes her 900 hours to write a book, and she broke it down for you on all of the different phases. And I think that's probably pretty accurate on how long it takes to write a book. She did say you should read like a writer, so make notes of every scene that is in your book, and you'll notice that there are more scenes and conflicts in the books you're reading than probably your own book, which means you need to build some more conflict and scenes inside of there. She talked about plagiarism and just the distinction between, if you call your school Hogwarts, that's plagiarism. But if you have your own magic academy that you call whatever, that's just borrowing an idea. So the main takeaway is take the time to learn how to write. So, just because you wrote a novel doesn't mean it has to be published. She even said her first novels and other things were never published because it takes a while to learn. And, don't expect the first novel to just be a bestseller right out of the gate. And more importantly, don't compare your first draft to somebody else's published finished novel that you see out there at the bookstore or on Amazon. Chapter 2 was about getting ready, and I loved what Carrie Ryan said. So I personally would love to write about thieves and criminals and car repossession, like crazy things, right? And so everyone's always told me, no, don't write that because no one's going to buy it. And Carrie did the same thing. She was like, you know what? I'm going to write about zombies because I love that, even though nobody's going to buy it and it wasn't really hot. But fast forward a few years and it did become super hot. I mean, who isn't watching The Walking Dead or is at least has heard of it? So I thought this was really great advice, and I've gotten this a lot too. And I will say I do get this advice pretty much only from trad authors. Anybody who's an indie author just tells me to write to market. So, again, this book I think is really great if you want to write trad as well. And not, so just, Allie Carter does not at all say anything negative in the least about self-publishing. In fact, she says many positive things about it, but I think it's a really great perspective because pretty much all of this advice and all of the contributors are traditionally published authors, and I think that in and of itself is really valuable for someone who wants to go that particular route or is even thinking about it. So the number one question every author gets, no matter which path you're on, is where do you get your story ideas? So, again, this to me is like something that only people who don't write ask this question, but she just does the what if game. She sets some ideas aside. She tries writing a couple chapters, but most importantly, she can't write a book unless she knows what the back cover copy is going to say. She's also said, don't even worry about genre, because when you're traditionally published, the publishing house will tell you what genre your book is going to fit in for marketing purposes. So, but just in general, in order to prepare, read a ton of books in your genre. So even if you're not able to write because you have a crazy job, you can still be preparing to be an author by reading as much as possible. The other thing is planning your book. So I put The High Society over here. This is how I found Allie Carter. I just love these books, and those were the first ones I read. So, Marissa Meyer, I love this. She's a plotter. And she had another quote later that we'll go over when we talk about series. But Alan Gratz said he also cured writer's block by outlining instead of planting. And I love this because I'm also an outliner. But this chapter, she talked about POV, and what dominates in your genre is probably the one that you should choose. She did go over the definitions of POV. I skipped over those because I thought the most interesting part was that she chose omniscient POV for the High Society because it helped to add tension. So I think that's another thing to think about when you think about POV is what's going to make for the best experience for the reader as well as what they're used to within that particular genre. Also, past versus present. She does the same thing. She tests it out with a first chapter to see which one sounds better, as well as testing out the different POVs. She talked about doing research and knowing the rules of your genre, and to read at least, like if you haven't read at least a minimum of 25 books in that genre, then you probably shouldn't be writing in that genre or even attempting to yet. So it's all trial and error. Just be flexible if you're not sure. There's really, I think what she was trying to say is there's really no right or wrong answer. You need to test out what works for you, which is a recurring thing that we'll hear in this book. The next one is talking about world building. So Marie Lu builds her characters first, and then she creates a world for her characters to excel in and kind of be their best and show those traits in. Holly Black talked about rules for magic. So I just listed them here for you. I thought those were a good reminder. Open world versus closed world, same thing, Holly Black. You know, the open is where Tony Stark is Iron Man, everybody knows who he is, versus closed where Hogwarts is a secret and nobody is supposed to know about it or that it exists. So Allie writes closed, and she said to ask these questions when you are doing world building. So the main takeaway from this is magic has to have rules and it has to have consequences. You can't just have people that can do anything or everything. You know, just like Superman has kryptonite that makes him weak. So think about those, as well as even if you do a modern contemporary, that's easier, but you still need to do some world building within there. So number 5 is creating your characters. So Marie Lu had a good takeaway saying, you know, villains are the hero of their own story. They aren't monsters. So like a monster would be Godzilla. If you've ever seen a Godzilla movie, guy doesn't have a purpose. He doesn't have a reason for being. He wasn't like abused as a child. He's simply just a monster. So this is not a good villain. A villain is someone who has a purpose and has some good rationale for doing what it is that he does. Also, when you think about your characters, think about both nature and nurture. So nurture is really the backstory that makes your character who they are. So the example she gave was Captain America. Because of all the bullying he had as a kid, it made him want to fight for the little guy. And that was a really good connection of nurture and who Captain America became. Your supporting characters should always challenge and or help your main character. You also need to give your characters room to grow. So give them some weaknesses, and, you know, just in general, reader expectations are that whoever the point of view character is, they're important. So if you throw in a POV chapter about a side character just because you think it's interesting, don't do it unless that character is really important to the story. Also, the first man that you see in your book, assuming obviously, of course, this is maybe written from a female POV, readers automatically assume that's going to be the love interest. So she had a really great example where she said, sometimes readers get confused and they think a story is a love triangle only because the author has introduced another male character who really has nothing to do with the love interest of the story. But because he was introduced before the real love interest, readers automatically assume that he's a potential love interest and then all of a sudden think it's a love triangle that you are writing. So something else to keep in mind, especially helpful for romance writers. So the best way to introduce new characters is make them new to your main character versus, you know, I'm sure you've read stories. I have too. It's so boring reading about how so and I are best friends and we've known each other our whole lives. And, you know, she always does this. Like, that's not interesting. So, you know, not that you can't give your characters best friends, but just think about it like from this perspective, from the reader, make it interesting for them. This is a book that you hope, I'm guessing, that people read. Also, how to make characters that aren't like you is, you know, show empathy. Male characters, remember, they're not all the same. The chicken or the egg. They should challenge and support your main character. Sources of conflict are man versus man versus nature, versus himself, versus a ticking clock. Whatever you're doing, the main takeaway is make sure you have conflict in there and that readers come for the feels, right? They want some emotion and they can only feel that via your characters. All right, plot. So Kirsten White at the end of every writing section, I thought this was a good idea so that she doesn't forget her train of thought. She leaves instructions for herself for the next day on what to do. I just thought that was interesting. And okay, so back to plot. Allie doesn't outline. So I said before she didn't say, I guess she does say here, she storyboards everything. And storyboard means like she puts up one of those big sheets, she has Post-its, she has note cards, and she moves them all around. I've heard I think Lauren Lane does this too. I 100% cannot do that. I like spreadsheets. But you know, if this is something that works for you, especially if it's something like a heist story or something really complicated like that, I think you might want to move things around or put clues in different places, especially with mysteries. But since I just write straight romance, it's easier for me to think linearly in a spreadsheet format. She uses the methods from the screenplay by Sid Fields. I think that's Fields, not Field. But that was the first book that her mother bought her because she originally wanted to be a screenwriter. And she storyboards she had an example in the book, which again is really great. It's the beginning, middle, and end. So she just does a 3-act structure. So nothing like voodoo complicated or something crazy. So stakes are the reason what will happen if your character fails. How to avoid plot holes. She said, don't even worry about it. You can fix those in the revisions. And if it feels like your plot is stalling, you can use the Hitchcock MacGuffin. So if you're not sure what a MacGuffin is, it's really nothing. It's just something, it's like a visual thing in the story that everyone wants to go after. But the main takeaway was use whatever method works for you, and writing your characters into a corner. People would ask her, how do you get out of it? She just said it's better to have a character that's written into a corner than a character with no problems at all, because that's a boring character. Chapter 7 is finding your process. Now, Erica Zhang said she went for years and she never finished everything. And so she just kept starting projects and starting something new. And it was her root cause. I'm not saying this is yours, but her root cause was because she didn't want to be judged. So just think about maybe the root cause of why you're not finishing your story. But she laid out a really great 13-step process on how she writes. And I just put it right here for you. It's pretty simple. And I thought this was pretty funny. So step number 7 is she cries. And she said, I think she said she put 30 hours into crying for every book. And it's kind of true. I don't know, she's literally crying, but there's like some agony, right? Every time you go to write and create something. And Jennifer Probst said this too, and she writes, there's crying as well. So common theme with authors. Allie writes from beginning to end. She doesn't skip around. And she writes on an Alpha Smart, which I had to Google that. I've never even heard of that. Supposedly it's some obsolete word processing machine. And she also uses Microsoft Word and Scrivener because obviously you have to share documents like that. But the Alpha Smart is so old, it doesn't have Wi-Fi, and that helps her to focus because obviously there's always going to be something fun and exciting on the internet. And you know, some days when she's writing, she doesn't actually write words. She's just working on the plot, which to me is outlining, but in planning. And Allie is a full-time writer now. I don't think she started out like that. But before that, she said you can really do a lot of things to just write on what she calls stolen time. So, you know, while the kids are playing soccer, while the kids are at the dentist, while the kids are sleeping, you know, some people said they got up at 4:30 in the morning to write because that's the only time they could be alone. And then also Allie had some tips on how to write more, and I listed them here. And she said to listen to critique partners and friends when they give you feedback, but to always go with your gut because at the end of the day, it's your story. And just like she said before, there's really no shortcut because everyone's always looking for a hack. I think the most popular blog posts are writing hacks or how to write, you know, I think it was 10,000 words in 10 minutes or something. So, you know, trial and error will really tell you what's going to work for you personally because everybody's different. Chapter 8 is starting your first draft. And I thought this was so true. Zoraida Cordova, I hope I'm saying that right. She said the hardest part about writing is the doubt that creeps in while you're writing, right? Like, so I have all these great ideas. And then when I start writing, I'm like, oh, this kind of sucks. Oh, this doesn't sound right. Oh, this isn't going to be that exciting. So totally relate to that. Her opening sentence from All Fall Down, and if you haven't read it, I actually love this series too. It was, when I was 12, I broke my leg jumping off the wall between Canada and Germany. So a couple things that she said. The first sentence always has to make you want to read the second sentence. So this first sentence tells you that this person is a daredevil, and also their world is not like ours. And I don't know why number 3 is there, because Canada and Germany are not near each other in any country or on any map. So that makes you want to read the second sentence. Now, the thing that a lot of new readers or writers do, she said, is they try to do a data dump right there in the first chapter to tell you all the cool things they thought of. And instead, you should hold that information and kind of sprinkle it in and let it come out later. So, you know, she said the things that make her as a reader stop reading is if the author tells, it definitely makes her stop reading, versus if the author shows her something. So the way to do that is simply to have more scenes. Also, word choice. I guess she gets this question a lot, and how to write fillers. So she said, don't do it. Obviously, if it's a filler chapter, then it's a boring chapter and it should just be cut out. 2 voices. I thought this was good. This was talking about the distinction between an authorial voice and a narrative voice. So the authorial voice is when people talk to you and they're like, what's your voice? That's you as an author. And every single book you ever write kind of has that voice and that style and that tone, versus narrative is the voice of that particular character and that character's personality. Action and tension, she went over that. And she talked about the ending and the 3 things your ending must do. And I repeated action and tension again, so I will delete that. And the main takeaway is to make everything as scene-based as possible. So if you feel like you are just writing a lot of telling and description and exposition, then change that and just add some more scenes. Editing your book. So Holly Black, and I thought this was interesting, she edits as she goes. That's crazy, right? Like we always hear, don't do that, just write the whole thing and edit later. But that's her process. And just like Allie always says, you know, find the process that works through you, and you'll only find that through trial and error. And the biggest distinction, and I think this is so true, is between newbies and experienced authors, is that newbies always kind of dread it and they say, oh, how many drafts do I have to do? Versus an experienced author says, how many drafts do I get to do right before the deadline and the book goes to print, because they are always working on perfecting it. And it's this kind of mind shift change that really gets you into the experienced writer. Really minor detail. Someone asked her how she keeps track of her different versions for revisions, and she simply just renames each file with the number draft number 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, and then she puts a timestamp like June 2019. So again, the main takeaways is what needs to be changed will be easier to spot if you kind of just let your book sit for a while and then come back to it. So now we're going to talk about writer's block. This is chapter 10. And Daniel Jose Older says, you know, the button chair, which is really popular as something that people say to other authors, can actually cause you some more stress just looking at that blank screen. So Daniel, and actually a lot of authors, as well as Allie, said, just go ahead, step away, do something else, and then come back to it. Now, Allie said that there are 3 different types of writer's block. One is that you just don't want to write. So the solution is just to take time off and then get back to writing. The second is you want to write, but you can't seem to physically do it. So she's saying, you know, be kind to yourself if writing, and also this is really important, if writing isn't something that's making your life better, like if it's making you miserable, then ask yourself, why are you even doing it in the first place? So number 3, there's something wrong with your book, and the solution for that is just to keep writing. So, you know, the main takeaway, honestly, I think there were 2, is one, to just, you know, take a break, but keep writing. And then also what I put in bold there for number 2 is, you know, if you're complaining that much and dreading writing so much that you're just making yourself miserable, then maybe writing novels isn't for you, right? So maybe sometimes we really want the glory of saying, I'm an author and I'm published, but at the heart of it, 99.9% of the time you're just writing. So if you really don't like that, then maybe, you know, think about something else you can do with all of that creative talent. Chapter 11 is writing series. So I said we were going to get back to Marissa Meyer. So I thought this was cool. She writes her books like a video game. So each book, her character gathers new skills and knowledge. And then with the next book, they take that in, but the villains as well get smarter and more challenging. And so it's kind of like, that's how she escalates the tension and makes each book more interesting than the last book. Now, there are 3 types of series according to Allie. The first is the Harry Potter model, which is what I think all of us think about. It's just one story told over a bunch of different books. The second one is one that I actually love. It's the Nancy Drew model, which is more episodic in nature. Now, they're not always mysteries, but they actually fit that model a little better. And she said these are incredibly rare. Like, you never see these in young adult. So it's really the first one that you see. And then there's the romance model, and that's where she calls this when you have companion novels of unrelated stories. So maybe it's the same story, but the same feeling. And I talked about this in the Plot Your Romance course where we talked about series, and there is a really great series called The Mail Order Bride. So it's basically that same story, but told, and there's a new state. There's like 50 books for each state. So it's for people who want to get that same sort of feeling. Also, she talked about don't end with a cliffhanger, just end with a hint of a future conflict, only because you don't know if your book will be made into a series. For traditional, it's possible your first or second book might not sell, and nobody will want to publish that third book. So keep that in mind. Also, publishing your book. So Marie Lou said she got 600 rejections before she sold her book. So, you know, she went through, this actually was a really great contributor chapter because she listed out how many rejections every single contributor got before they finally secured a deal. And I think there was only like one person that had 0 rejections. So what is this chapter about? 3 things you need to do before going pro. First, you need to finish a book. I feel like that's probably obvious, but I like that she mentioned that because I don't know that everyone thinks that. They just think they can sell a book on an idea or a couple chapters. And I think you can do that for nonfiction, especially if you're a huge name like Kim Kardashian. But for fiction, you should really finish the book. You also need positive feedback from honest sources. So that means not your mom, not your roommate, not your brother. It should be from a contest or somewhere else where someone is a third party that has no reason to want to bolster your ego. And you're ready to start a publishing career. So just like at that very first chapter, we talked about how one person had foregone, you know, just hanging out in college and having that experience just so that they could finish a book. You have to be ready to do that when you start a publishing career. She talks about the 5 steps on how to get an agent. And then another interesting thing from David Leviathan is Wattpad, because I think a lot of people writing young adults are publishing things to Wattpad. He said, just make sure really upfront with people that this is a first draft and be ready to take it down in case your book gets sold. The only thing that you would want to leave on Wattpad is if it's a separate story with different characters, but related to that same world to kind of entice people and get them excited about that. So the other thing is she's always saying, even if book A is out on submission, just go ahead and start writing book B. And, you know, rejection is really good because it gives you more space and more feedback that you need to keep writing. And, you know, in general, I think her main takeaway is that you should write because you love the act of writing, not for the glory of publication. Chapter 13 is planning your future. I think this is the last one, so we're almost to the end. So this page is just contributions. So I think the main point was people were asking if they could become a full-time writer. And, you know, Shannon Hale, Stephanie Perkins, and Alan Gratz all had people financially supporting them. So yeah, they could become financial full-time authors. Shannon quit her job after her first book so she could be with her baby. And her husband, you know, took care of all the finances. She's now a full-time mom to 4 kids. She still tries to find time to write because writing makes her happy. But, you know, obviously being a mom was number 1. Stephanie Perkins quit her job right after she landed an agent. But remember, or you should know that Stephanie had her husband paying all the bills and covering all of her medical insurance. Same thing with Alan Gratz. He quit his job before he even sold his first book because he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. What is this chapter about? So Allie says if you want to write, you can write in other mediums like magazines, TV, movies, right? Because in theory, you're writing because you love writing. But she does warn that there are more people that want these jobs than there are jobs available, so they only take the best. And that most writers still have a day job. And instead of thinking of it like I have to do a day job, you should look at it as you have an opportunity to have two jobs. Like how cool is that? You can do two different things. And of course, she said to keep writing. All right, if you found these useful, let me know in the comments and I will keep doing these book summaries every month for you. And again, if you want to chat about this some more and you are 18 years of age or older, join Jessie and I for this Friday's Ice Cream Social, where we'll be talking all about this book in more detail, as well as romance writing and of course, ice cream. So the links are all in the description. All right, I'm super excited to see all of you this Friday, or if you can't make it, you can always watch it afterwards. And I will talk to you guys on Friday or next week. Bye.